could we be given warning at the beginning of a programme if there's going to be anything about the Beatles, as all Beatle fans can make sure to listen, and have a chance to ring up other fans to make sure they are also listening.
Hi everybody, this is John here. This is Paul, George,
and Ringo.
And we're very happy to be on your program once again.
Hi everybody, and welcome to another Beatles News Brief podcast. I'm your host and Beatles news guy, Steve Marinucci, and today we have a delightful show for you. Our subject is the movie Miss O'Dell, based on the book by Chris O'Dell, who worked for the Beatles, and also the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton, and many others. We have a two-part discussion of the film. In part one, I'll talk one-to-one with Chris O'Dell about her time with the Beatles and her career, and she'll reveal the backstory about what's in the book. In part two, Chris and I will be joined by the film director, Simon Weitzman, and we'll go deeper into the film and talk about how the film was developed and was made. You'll also hear stories that weren't in the movie. And finally, I'll have a quick Beatles news roundup. So let's get started. I'm here talking with the great Chris O'Dell. Chris, hello.
Hello, Steve. Great. Oh, I like that.
It's wonderful to talk to you. The first thing I noticed about the movie is that the movie is kind of a supplement to the book. Even though the titles are the same, there's a lot of stuff that's in the book, for example, that's not in the movie. And
Right.
There's stuff in the movie that's not in the book. Can you explain that?
We never actually meant to use the book as the format. What we did, the book was the book. And this was another way to go back and show visually what it was like at Apple, around London, the different locations, and try to get a more in-depth and visual picture of my time at Apple, which I think it did, and bring in people who were part of that, or at least certainly the next generation. So
Right.
it was never intended. It was really, I think Simon Weissman had the idea of what he wanted in the documentary. And I think we both agreed right at the top, this is not meant to follow the book. It would be too hard. Really.
Okay.
It could be a
Um,
movie.
Right. And it was also kind of a reunion for you with Patty, with a lot of people that you knew back then. You had not been back there since you left. Right. When was the last time you had been there?
I lived there in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
But that was after I was married and had my son there. And I've been back, I'm trying to think. I think a few times I would go and see Patty and stay with her. But not, I realized it was like 10 years or something from the last time that I was there to the time that we filmed this documentary.
And the documentary was filmed when?
We filmed it in, I think it was
20
like 222.
Okay, so 3 years ago. You credit Derek Taylor as the person who really started everything for you.
No doubt about it. I mean, I had met some other people in the job I was in, promotion, that would have been a lot of steps to get to a proper career. But Derek put it in the fast track.
A statement about him hating Paul in 1968. And was it the breakup that he was really angry about?
That Derek hated Paul. That actually came off of that little piece of paper that Mark Lewison had. And I wouldn't have known that. I mean, I was shocked to see that piece of paper because I think Paul did that at a time when he really was aware of how much money Apple was costing to run.
And I'm looking in the book and all the complaints about how much money was being spent over 2 weeks.
Like the press office. Yeah.
Lots of drinking going on there.
Journalists were known for that. So it was a good way to get them there, get the information out. I mean, there was a motive behind Derek's madness, but Paul was in good faith trying to cut down the expenses. I mean, that was just one area.
How was it to work in Apple with the Beatles as essentially your bosses? They were kind of on a mountain. where you guys were all kind of down below.
I can't imagine that anyone who worked there wasn't a fan of the Beatles. So, but during the time that I worked at Apple and that they were around, Paul was the first one who came in every single day. And he might as well have been getting a paycheck because he was really participating in what was going on and making decisions, really looking at things, both at Wigmore Street and then at Row. And then when he kind of moved back, John and Yoko moved into Apple. And then John was the in-house Beatle. They were always coming there and walking through. And then once the recording studio was done, they were there almost every day. So I think they were just part of the team, even though they were a little exalted.
Right.
And we all respected them. They were still just part of what was going on every day.
It was interesting to read how the recording studio was a world itself, and they were very careful about who they let in. And you went to your first recording session thanks to Pete Shott. You got into others too, but that was interesting to read how you had to be so careful about getting in, that it was kind of up to Mal Evans. He was kind of the guard, but Pete got you past Mal Evans.
Exactly. And Paul told me to ask, when I asked Paul, could I come in? Paul said, talk to Mal. Well, Mal was the gatekeeper. It was obvious. So I thought Paul said yes. I was pretty sure I was going to go into the studio. And, as an American coming over, I really didn't have all of those rules. And they were rules, I found out, about a behavior around the four of them. And so it just seemed, Paul was there. He was nice. We talked. Oh, can I come to the studio? It just seemed natural. But it wasn't. And in fact, I wouldn't have gotten in if Pete Shotton, who was there visiting John, because he was his best friend from Liverpool, or one of them, if Pete hadn't liked me and said, oh, do you want to go down to the studio? I would have been sitting in the reception area all day at Abbey Road.
Yeah.
My studios.
Wow. You called Apple the hub of the world. That Apple was that central to London. I thought it was just one little office and everybody kind of took the Beatles kind of for granted. But basically, that's not the case. That wasn't the case back then, right?
You mean in terms of the employees or the people who came to try to see them?
Well, the visibility of Apple.
Yeah, you would. The address was on all of the stationery, so it was easy for someone to finally come to. But you couldn't just walk in and walk around. Let me put it that way. There was a doorman, Jimmy the doorman, and they were very careful about who got past the front desk. So it wasn't open to everybody. Someone was telling me last night how, actually Mark Lapidus told me how he went there once and John came outside to look at a delivery that was made in a truck. So Mark talked to him. That's the first time Mark met him.
Wow.
And, yeah.
I've talked to Mark before about him meeting John, but I thought they had met.
But no, they met there and then had a further relationship. But people would come and they would stand outside and if they were lucky, one of them or two of them would walk out the door and they'd get an autograph.
Early in the movie, Mark Lewison shows you that letter supposedly written or dictated by Peter Asher that you typed about rejecting David Bowie, and Peter denies it. What's your side to the story?
I didn't even know who David Bowie was. So Peter was in America quite often, and he would just say, I had a standard thing I would just write out, which apparently wasn't very good English, but never mind. So I wrote letters all the time. So I had no idea that we had rejected David Bowie until Mark Lewison showed me the letter.
Wow. Where did Lewison get it, I wonder?
Don't know. Mark has a lot of stuff.
Right.
And I have no idea where he gets them, but he's got a lot.
But Peter denies, he said the language wasn't his. Does that make...
I'm not remembering the words exactly. Oh, I do actually, because Peter kind of repeated it too many times when we talked about it in the documentary.
Right.
I put, it's not something we are looking for right now. And Peter's like, that's just bad English. I wouldn't have said that. And he's right, he wouldn't have. He was a well-educated Englishman. But
Right.
as American, I said it because I wrote the letters. I made them up and I signed Peter's name to them. And yeah,
You wouldn't have made that up.
I wouldn't have been told these were the rejected tapes.
You thought Neil Aspinall was the fifth Beatle. The old fifth Beatle question. Why did you think it was Neil?
Well, he was there right from the beginning, more or less. And, he was very instrumental in those early days before Mal was happening. They trusted him probably as much as anyone on this planet. And he just always seemed like the one part, the fifth part of the whole thing.
Where does Mal then come in? Is
Mal
he
was hired.
the sixth Beatle?
He's the sixth Beatle, and then Derek has to be the seventh. And where do we go from there? And Mal was hired after they started playing at the Cavern Club, and he was a bouncer, and Brian Epstein hired him. So he came, I don't know how long after Neil, but Neil had been pretty ensconced in the whole group at that point.
Okay. You said your first Beatles recording session was Revolution number 9.
Actually, it was Revolution number 1.
It wasn't number 9 because you said number 9 in the...
I know, I was wrong. And then suddenly someone said to me, I think that was Revolution number 1. And it came on the radio within weeks. And I went, of course, that was the hand clapping one.
That makes more sense.
I stand corrected on that. It was Revolution number 1. I'm amazed I remembered it was Revolution because I was in such shock walking around. Suddenly I'm clapping hands on a Beatle record and I hardly even got into the studio. So, yeah.
And you also were on Hey Jude. And then I read that you were also part of George Harrison's Hare Krishna mantra. And I had described Hey Jude as a spiritual experience. But both of those were spiritual experiences, weren't they?
Completely. God, I forget about that one. The Hare Krishna one.
That's from the book.
In talking, I often forget that one. I say, there were 3 songs. Well, no, I say there was 2 songs, one hand clapping and one singing on Hey Jude. Yes, I had gotten quite close with the Krishnas because I was the first person they met at Apple and put them together with Peter. I thought it was I love the idea of Eastern philosophy and religion. So I was very drawn to them. I was amazed. One of them asked me to marry him. And I said, I don't think I'd be a very good Krishna wife. And I wouldn't. So my mother was in town, had come to visit me. And I was trying to find things for her to do. And it just so happened George was recording with the Krishna the mantra that day.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, let's go there. You can see the recording studio. And we got there and there was George and the Krishnas and Paul and Linda were there also. And
it's good. I'll remember them from in the book, but wow.
They didn't sing, but they may have even left. I don't remember. I just remember that Paul was behind the board. So I'm not really sure what he was doing. But then Shyam Sundar, who was kind of the main guy there, said, would you like to come and sing with us on the recording? And my mom is like, I don't know the words. So he wrote them out for her. And we went to the studio and she sang.
Wow.
Hi.
And so, those 2 songs, Hey Jude and Hare Krishna, were spiritual experiences, weren't they?
Yes. Right.
What did you feel anything? Did you feel any, because I've always loved the Hare Krishna. Yeah. In fact, I just played it a little while ago after I hadn't listened to it in a long time. And I love hearing that. It's always been a favorite of mine.
No, I loved it. And actually, I think I wrote it in the book that I got it why they chanted. That was
Mhm.
probably the first time that I got it because we did it over and over and over again with each take. And I went, oh, this feels good. I like. And you know what? I'm still in touch with Shamsundar. We've had a lifelong friendship.
Is he still in London?
No, he's American. They were the ones who came over were American.
Oh, they were. Okay.
They lived at Friar Park. So I think it was 3 families
Mhm.
that moved into Friar Park, Shamsundar being one of them. And over the years, we lost contact for a bit, but actually, I've seen him a couple times in the past year.
You also talk about picking up Harry Nilsson at the airport.
Yeah.
And this was after the first RCA album. Had he also done the tribute to the Beatles at that point? Or did they know about him?
Oh, well, here's the thing. I met Harry, first of all, in LA.
Uh-huh.
Derek, he did a private screening of Magical Mystery Tour. And I was with
You-
Derek. So anyway, I met Harry briefly.
Mm.
And when I was at Wigmore Street, his first album was the one I played on weekends when I would go in there and work and listen over and over and over again. So meeting him and picking him up at the airport was cool. I was really excited about that. However, I was trying to save money, so I took a bus to the airport, an airport bus. And when I got there, I suddenly thought, well, I'm picking them up, but I don't have any transportation to take them back in. So when I did actually see him and his manager, they'd already seen Ringo and Maureen, who were leaving and they left their limo for them to come back in. So I rode with them in their limo.
I didn't remember from reading this in the book the first time around, but you had something to do with Frank Sinatra recording The Lady is a Tramp. Talk about that for people who don't know the story. I'm also a Sinatra fan. I love that song.
Well, I was kind of not yet planted in a job. Derek, he let me kind of make my way once I got there. So I did odd jobs. I was there every day and I would get called to do, like, if somebody was sick, I would take their place secretary. I would do the switchboard. I knew how to do those old switchboards. And Peter Brown just one day said, I want you to take this tape and go to Twickenham. And I think it was the EMI plant, which I think was in Twickenham. I'm not sure. And he said, don't let anyone see it. Don't let it out of your sight the whole time that you're there, and then bring it back. So I did. I got there. They had good instructions at EMI because they didn't ask to go take it to another room. I went into the plant with them while they actually cut the record. And I was as surprised as they were when they were playing it back that it was Frank Sinatra singing The Lady is a Champ. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So I took it back to Peter and he said, I think it was a birthday present for her.
Lori.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
And so he said, give me this copy because there will never be any copies made.
But one got out somehow.
Well, I only made one copy, so who knows how that happened. I mean, I thought that went directly to Maureen, but that was the idea, only one copy.
Did you ever meet Sinatra, or did Sinatra ever show up anywhere with them? There are pictures of George with him because as you know, he later loves the song Something that George wrote for Patty, and he performed it. But you never saw him or anything like that.
No, never ran into him.
Oh well,
different circles.
There we go. There's another. You talk in the book and in the movie about falling asleep at Abbey Road. They'd been looking for you and they never found you.
Oh, well, actually, what it was I didn't have lifelong friends there. The only people I really knew were the people I worked with. So I had a lot of free time on my hands. So I went in when George was doing Savoy Truffle, and we had a bottle of wine, and we drank a lot. Long story. At one point, I thought, okay, I got to go to the bathroom. Went to the ladies' room, and there was this beautiful plush couch in the powder room. I laid down on it, and that was the end of my night at Abbey Road. But I did wake up the next morning on the couch at Abbey Road going, what happened? So George later said, what happened? Or the guard, EMI said, what happened to you? They were looking all over for you. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm not spilling the beans on myself. And then George asked me later, and I said, oh, I went home. I mean, it wasn't one of my greatest moments, let's put it like that.
The day the Hells Angels came in to Apple, you were there, and you stayed pretty calm from what the book said. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, well, George had met them in America, and we got the letter saying they were everybody said George invited them. I don't know. But we all got the memo that they were coming and to be cool. And you know what? They just, at first, it was kind of like, oh, because they were kind of tough. There were only two of them, by the way, Frisco Pete and, oh, Sweet William. God, his name is so great. How could I forget him? Anyway, so I just got friendly with them. I thought, well, heck, I'm not going to run. So it was easier to be friends than it was to have, because they were in my office all the time. And they were pretty much taking over things. So, yeah, I became friends with them.
And it also says here in the book that Rock Scully and Ken Kesey and Frankie Hart were all.
Yeah, they all came together at that time, right? So I was thinking, and then Frankie eventually was with Bobby Weir after that, after she went back.
Oh, okay. With the Grateful Dead, yeah.
She ended up with Bobby Weir for quite a while. And I went up to visit them and stayed with them in about 1970 so I could see her. I wasn't a Grateful Dead fan, let's put it that way. So it was just kind of, okay. But anyway, that was a pretty interesting time. Good friends were made. And actually, Sweet William passed a couple years ago, but his girlfriend let me know that. And we were able to kind of send little messages to each other. Only time I'd seen him since 1960.
Okay. What did you think of Magic Alex?
I didn't.
Really?
Oh, honestly, I mean, I knew him. I went to his wedding, believe it or not. But it was pretty apparent. The words was going around already at that time that nothing really particularly good was coming out of Magic Alex. So I think I just kind of, there was nothing to make me want to talk to him. I didn't have a draw.
Getting back to Mal, that tape of him telling David Frost that he appeared in a dream, and that's where Paul kind of got the inspiration for Let It Be. And Mark Lewison talks about that with you, as I recall, in the movie. Do you think story or Paul's story is the right one?
What is Paul's story?
Well, Paul's story, I mean, he calls it Mother Mary. So,
oh, well, actually, I think that Ken Womack's book about Mal covers that really beautifully and not so graciously in terms of the behavior. But Paul, I mean, it was Brother Malcolm. And then Paul said, look, we're going to change it to I'm changing it to Mother Mary. So, but don't worry, you'll still get some of he was supposed to get some royalties from it, according to Mal, and he didn't. And he did. So, I mean, Paul told him it's not going to be you anymore. You're not going to be this fifth Beatle.
ooh, okay. You mentioned about Peter Brown having access to the personal stories of the Beatles. What did you think of The Love You Make, the book?
You know, I read it so long ago, and I was so affected by them. I was with Patty, I think, when it came out, and, you know, they weren't pleased with it. So I just kind of thought, oh, well. But actually, I've read the latest version of it.
The new one with the interviews? Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting. I mean, I think Peter just told the truth. It's just that it was a time when people didn't want the truth out. The Beatles never really are happy when somebody writes a book about them, I don't think, unless it's something that they signed off on.
well, getting a little ahead because I was probably going to ask this at the end. You said that in the movie that your book didn't go over well with some people.
Yeah, some
Did
people
it?
weren't happy.
Are we talking Beatles or are we talking other people?
Well, I don't want to really get too much into it because it's
No, I mean,
better. I
just in
think that
general.
I would say in general, it was people close to them. Actually, I only know this because other people told me. None of the people who might have been upset came to me and said, "Oh, I'm really upset about that," which kind of was disappointing because, I can handle it. And I got the impression that maybe a few of the Stones people were not happy about it. But you know what? It was my story. So, and I realized an interesting thing this morning that there weren't a lot of women working around, not just the Beatles, but that whole scene at that time. And really, most of us didn't come out of it with these great fortunes that we made working for these people. Very few did actually. And it was just a lot of the ladies have had to do things to continue to earn money, including me. Because I mean, I was a therapist, so I got money there. But in terms of the actual money from rock and roll, we are telling our stories. We're giving the gift to other people. And some of it is because it helps us financially. And I'm not going to lie about it.
Getting back to that, when it was the image, though, that you guys emerged with, you talk about it in the movie, you were called groupies.
Well, any woman who was around.
See, that's unfair. You did a lot of work. You described it in your book. There were relationships, I'm sure, that's kind of natural, but you were there to work. That's what got you in there in the first place, correct?
Yeah. And I, over the years, just through my friendships, was able to put things together. Like Leon Russell was dying to do Beware of Darkness when he first heard it at George's house, but he wouldn't ask him. So I asked George if he could record it. And I brought Billy Preston to Apple, when he first came back over to the state, right before he went to sing with them. So there were little things. You can't help it. If you're involved in all these people, you're going to make connections. It's just going to happen. So I think that's pretty valuable.
Yeah. That version of Beware of Darkness that Leon does in Bangladesh gives me chills. I mean, that is so good. It really is. Another thing in the movie that was interesting was you said Patty was not on the rooftop.
No,
And she talks about the reasoning that she thought George was, didn't want her up there. I mean, that was really interesting.
well, George didn't want to be there. I mean, it was at that point, it was a burden for him to even have to go and do it. And so he's not going to take her because he doesn't even want to be there. I mean, and the excuse he used is that, well, there's no audience. And I said, it's true. There were 4 of us who actually had seats on the roof. Me, Ken Mansfield, who worked for Capitol Records,
Right.
Maureen, and Yoko. And that was it. When it first started, we were the audience until everybody started crawling out of windows.
Peter Asher says he wasn't in the office that day.
Peter was in LA during that period of time. And Peter clarifies in the documentary that Kevin Harrington was mistakenly identified as Peter. And a lot of people who watched it said, "Oh, but you were there. I saw the red hair." Well, Kevin Harrington had really red hair too. And Kevin was there. He was on the roof. Peter, not in town. I went up to see Peter a couple weeks ago in Phoenix. Also was there not that many months ago. For some reason, I've suddenly seen Peter's show twice in a row. Really fun and interesting.
I've seen it several times. We just saw it a couple of weeks ago here locally. It was great to see him again. It's a wonderful show. Definitely fun. Another interesting story. You heard Joe Cocker record She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, and then you brought Paul in to hear it. I mean, just to see Paul's face
Yeah. No, they were both at the same studio at Olympic. They were at Olympics.
Olympic.
Paul was down the hall in one of the studios and Joe was in the other. And I was actually really good friends with Denny Cordell and Glenn Johns, who were producing and engineering it. And so I would just pop over there. I spent a lot of time in studios at night. And he was recording. She came in through the bathroom window and I was listening and we all know what that is. That's Joe. It's amazing.
Oh, it is.
I bet Paul would like to hear this.
Good to be there.
And he happened to be down there working. And I just said, do you want to hear this? Joe Cocker's actually just recording.
Did he know who Joe Cocker was?
Oh, yeah, of course.
And so he knew nothing about the song.
I don't know if he knew Joe was doing the song, to be honest with you.
Mhm.
I really don't. But it was nice for Joe, too, to have Paul come in and oh, yeah, that's good. Raise that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful story. You had a history with Leon Russell, which, if you read the book, people can find out about. But your initial meeting with him was interesting because you were talking about him and you didn't know it was him.
Well, I had been told, I saw the cover of Delaney and Bonnie's album back, and Frankie Hart was with me, and there was this picture of Leon with the long kind of silver salt and pepper hair and beard, these piercing eyes. And I said, who is that? And Frankie said, oh, that's Leon Russell. He's living with Rita Coolidge. And I said, how could anyone live with him? He scared me. I have to admit, just that photograph scared me. So Denny Cordell brought him up quite a while after that. And the salt and pepper hair, these piercing eyes. Leon was not all warm and fuzzy. So, you had to do a lot. He's one of those people you had to work really hard to have a conversation with. So that was it. But I asked him if he would do a Jackie Lomax session because Nicky Hopkins was out of the country, the piano player, and George said, oh, yeah, Leon would be great. So I asked Leon to do it, and he said, yeah. And in fact, the session got canceled. So he said, well, would you like to go out to dinner? I don't have anything planned. And I'm like, okay. So it kind of went from there.
You also tell the story in the movie about the time Phil Spector put the gun to your head.
I was one of the girls who got Phil Spector's gun to their head. Fortunately, not the one that fatally got the gun to the head, but Phil was a good friend. I hung out with him a lot. I met him at George's house originally, and we just got along, and I hung out with him. He was a little different. My hypnotherapist that I was seeing at the time actually said, I think he's paranoid schizophrenic, but we didn't pay attention to that. Now, after I became a therapist, I thought, what was I, crazy? But anyway, he was a lot of fun. He was very quirky. And one night we were sitting in an Italian restaurant on the Sunset Strip, and I felt this metal thing on the side of my head. And I'm like, I knew what it was. He always had guns. He was shooting guns all the time. So back then, I don't think we took that seriously enough, that people had mental health issues and actually were kind of dangerous. But because they were music people, we just didn't think about that. We just thought they were kind of interesting and eccentric and things like that. And I named Jim Gordon as another example of that.
Right. But, I think actually during that era, it extended beyond music people. I think the whole hippie thing kind of was a little loose in that respect.
And we didn't really understand mental illness at that point. I mean, we were,
right.
I mean, look, we thought everything that Keith Moon did was really funny. But in fact, it wasn't that funny. Driving your car into a swimming pool is not that funny if you think about it.
See, you saw things. I saw The Who with Keith Moon a couple of times. And yeah, he was funny. But I was also at the Cow Palace show when he passed out. And that was sad.
It was very sad. I mean, really. Yeah, his whole story's really kind of sad, bless him. And he was a kind man.
When George told you you were going to be fired, you sounded in the movie like you seemed rather relaxed and you weren't really stressed out about it. But were you just a little stressed out about that?
The only part that would have been stressful at that, there was nothing going on. I had lived at Friar Park, and George, we both agreed it was time to go back to Apple because there really wasn't much more I was going to do there. And there was nobody at Apple left. Derek was gone. Almost half the staff had been fired already. So Richard DeLello and I sat in the press office alone, going in our minds thinking, why were we here? What was the reason for this? That's when we thought we'd write a book. And in the end, he did write it, The Longest Cocktail Party. And I didn't because I was having too much fun. But I kept busy. I would go out to Eric Clapton's house and hang out there for a few days, or, go shopping or do different things around, just things to kind of keep busy. So it was in a way, but I couldn't quit because they had to pay me money when they fired.
Ah, okay.
Right. Yeah.
I meant to ask you when you were talking about Leon earlier, did you see Leon in later years?
Oh, yeah. I saw him. He would come to Tucson and I would go down, see him, go backstage and say hi. I think probably the last time I saw him was maybe a few years before he died. Just guessing. I went down to see him. And I was living on an island off the coast of Honduras. And I went back there, and that's when I heard that he had died. So maybe, it was 2 or 3 years.
I was going to ask you about Miss Odell and George's comment that it was going to make you famous. Did you think that, George had kind of a wit about him? Was he being a little humorous there, or was he being really serious, you think?
Well, the way I remember is that he was serious, but in his way.
There we go.
I didn't know. He didn't think I wanted to be famous. I don't think that was where he was going. But he knew the power of the Beatles. And he knew that if he wrote a song about me with my name in it, it would probably follow me through my life. I don't know if he realized how much, but so I think it was his humor mixed with sincerity. I wrote this song about you and it's going to make you famous.
What do you think of it now when you hear it?
Oh, I love hearing it. It was my ringtone on my phone for years. Anyway, it still amazes me that he wrote it, to be honest. I mean, he must have a lot of time on his hands. And the regular version, the non-laughing version, obviously was supposed to be the record, but Capitol said, no, we want Miss Odell as the A-side because, it's another side of you. It doesn't look like all that spiritual stuff. It takes away from it. But George quite rightly chose Give Me Love, Give Me Peace as the A-side.
Yeah. And that discussion with you and Patty about having songs written about you, Miss Odell is not the only song written about you.
No, Leon Russell wrote 2 songs, Pisces, Apple Lady, and
Hummingbird.
Hummingbird. Yeah. Hummingbird was so beautiful.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, those 2 songs he wrote for me and George's song. And I think that might be it.
Is there more that we don't know about?
No, I don't think so. There was a guy from Memphis, Don Nix.
Oh, yes.
Anyway, he and I were dating for a while, and he called me up one day and said, oh, I've written a song for you. It's called Miscellaneous.
Oh, okay.
All right, thanks, Don. Bye.
He had a song that George played on. I can't remember the title of it. And he was also involved with Joe Cocker.
Well, that whole Shelter were pretty mashed. And Don was part of that because of his relationship with Leon. So that would make sense, yeah.
Okay. You talk about all the firings and resignations by Alan Klein. I mean, how did that whole Alan Klein thing?
Well, let me see. John kind of brought him to the attention of everybody. And I think it really was whether it was going to be Paul's father-in-law, Lee Eastman,
Right.
or bring in someone who wasn't related to anyone. And I
Mhm.
think that John felt that would be the better way to go. And Paul and Ringo, or George and Ringo went along with that. And I can see that. Lee Eastman may have been great for them. Who knows? But
Mhm.
it was hard to think that someone's father-in-law was going to be in charge of everything. I get that. So, yeah, that was kind of how it all happened.
So you're still keeping up your friendship with Patty?
We spoke just a couple days ago.
Okay. Let me throw out a couple of names. Billy Preston.
Well, the last time I saw Billy was in LA, and he was not well, but I didn't know he was as sick as he was. And what I learned later is he was in Phoenix when he died. If I had known that, I'd gone up there. But I love Billy. And
Yes.
so over the years, I would see him every so often. We weren't in constant contact, but yeah.
Do you miss those crazy days?
Sometimes, but here's the thing. I think, see, I've been living out of that. I became a therapist, addiction and mental health counselor after that, as I was raising my son back here in Tucson. And I think that was a hard time. I really did miss it because I had cut myself off somewhat from everyone. If I had stayed in London, a lot of those relationships would have kept on. But being in Tucson, Arizona, didn't exactly encourage that. People didn't come through all the time. So I began to lose a lot of those friendships, and not lose them, but they weren't there, and I missed them. Now I look back and I just have memories. I don't want to go back. I have no desire to ever have to relive through that.
Let me ask you to give a one-sentence summary of each of the Beatles. Let's start with Paul.
Paul was, and I do believe still is, a very personable guy who really is, he's carrying the legacy of the Beatles. And he always has. That's always been important to him.
When was the last time you saw him?
Actually, the opening night of Love in Vegas.
Oh, okay.
Well, George, I could write a book about.
Are you going to?
No, probably not. George was the least involved in the fame. He didn't like it. I think that was a hard one for him, but he could be really kind. He could also really put his hand up and stop you from getting too close. But I just felt the closest to him right from the beginning.
Okay.
Ringo, fun, always good for a joke. And amazing to me that he's still doing what he's doing. It's just mind-boggling.
Have you seen him recently?
Not for quite a... Oh, actually, I went to a show when he played here in Tucson.
What did you think of the fact that at his age, he's still doing the jumping jacks at the
Well,
end?
you know what? He did that, and then the next show he did, he fell. And I'm like, dude, don't do that anymore. But I see him still doing it, so good for him. I know that he takes very good care of himself.
Yeah, I've heard him say that too. And then John.
John was always more difficult to get to know, but during the lost weekend, as they call it, when he was with Mabe, was around him a lot more. I mean, at Apple, he was fine and we interacted and everything, but that period of time, we were all living in the house in Santa Monica, so I saw him every day. And he was just a really nice man. I mean, he had the Liverpool way. They all had the Liverpool way of cutting you right down if they wanted to. But underneath it was, and John came across that way almost more than anyone, but he was actually a really nice, considerate person, I found.
Patty.
Patty, well, she was the person that I really got to know the best, first of all. I mean, can you believe George took me home one night after a recording session and, hi, Patty, here's Chris. So we got to know each other fairly quickly. I mean, she's like, if you believe in karma, she and I've had some amazing karma together.
Yoko?
Yoko, not particularly warm and fuzzy. For me, was not easy to get to know. And I never really had any reason to get to know her very well. I mean, I respect her artistic side and I understand how closely they were drawn by that. But as a person, not really. I mean, also I was around at the time when everybody blamed her for breaking up the Beatles, but she was a small part of it.
Linda?
Linda, we were really good friends when she first came because she loved Tucson and I was from Tucson. So we connected the first night that we met. And over the years, I didn't see as much of her, but she was a strong woman. I respect the strength that she had.
And Maureen. There's very little talk about Maureen.
Maureen was one of my best friends. And I mean, she and Patty were both in that category. I absolutely adored her. I was thinking about her today, and she died so young,
Yes,
but oh my God, that girl she was such a Liverpool chick. She was quick with words. She would fight for the little people. She was really cool. I loved Maureen. I miss her to this day.
Okay, I'm going to ask some standard things that I ask people. As far as Beatle albums, mono or stereo?
Stereo.
The UK or US albums?
US.
And favorite Beatles or solo Beatles song?
Well, I have to say my favorite was Miss Hotel.
I guess that's kind of a dumb question, but
No. Across the Universe, believe it or not, is one of the songs that really hit me hard when I first heard it. I loved it.
okay. Chris, this has been wonderful. You are great to talk to.
We're working on another documentary.
Oh, you are?
Well, you might find this interesting. Back in the 80s, it occurred to me because I had befriended women. I knew the longevity with the women friends were going to be a lot longer than with the men. So I called Patty and said, I want to write a book about the women, the wives behind the men. And she said, well, I'll take the photos. So we interviewed 11 women, actually 12, but Chrissy Woods she didn't want to continue with it. And we did that in the 80s. The first one was probably with Shirley Watts or someone early 80s. And Linda McCartney was the last one in 87.
Are these Beatle women or Apple women?
They're just like there's Steve Winwood's first wife, there's Bee Gees' wife, there's Shirley Watts, Astrid Wyman, Carolyn Waters, Roger Waters' wife. This was really wanting to know what it was like to live in the shadows of these men who were constantly being sought after. So I carried these cassette tapes. That's all I had, no video. Carried these cassette tapes around with me for God knows how long. Well, actually, up until now. And finally, Simon and Ken Womack and another person got really interested in it. So we're working on doing that, the whole women thing, and maybe adding a few women even.
Have you got a projected date for this?
We're just planning. I think that right now we're in the middle of getting a sizzle reel and a deck to go out to try to get the money to do it, to sell it. So it could take, this one took 3 years with Simon. So God knows how long this one will take. But I'd like to see women's stories out there. And Maureen, great interview with Maureen.
That's big because I'd never seen one, sir.
I'm excited to do it. I'm really excited to get the women's recognition, even though it's some years later. I think it's going to be. I'm really noticing that, Steve, that there's a lot of nostalgia now.
Yes.
And probably during these times, it's even nicer to have all that nostalgia.
Well, I really appreciate your taking the time with me. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And now to part two of our discussion. We'll talk about the making of Miss Odell with Chris and the film's director, Simon Weitzman. We'll talk about how the film was developed and how it was made. And you'll hear some interesting stories that weren't in the film. In the beginning, you'll hear Simon and Chris referring to the head of Maverick Films, Doug Schwab. But there's a lot with anecdotes and filmmaking perspectives. And following this, we'll have a short news roundup. Here we go. So let me ask the first question, and that is, when did the film start to come together? How did it start to come
I'd love to hear your side of this story, Simon. I've told it so many damn times.
I'm trying. I tell you what, I'm trying. Was it
You
2022?
can't even remember, can you? Actually, it was 2022
Wasn't it? Yeah.
and in New Jersey.
New Jersey, and I had because I'd been working with Doug, who is the funder and the distributor for this film,
together?
for a year or so, and he had sort of come to me and said that he'd read Chris's book and that he really loved the book, and so I got a copy of the book and I loved the book, and he said, I really want to do a film about Chris. I wonder if she's done anything because we didn't know whether, it's possible that people are already in production with things. So we happened to all be in the same place at the same time, didn't we? In New Jersey at the Fest for Beatles fans in 2022. And I'll let Chris do, 'cause Chris tells the story of how Doug approached her far better than I can.
I had just been on stage. Doug later told me that the reason he came to talk to me was because they asked me, is it true that it was all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll? And I went, yeah. And he liked that, the way that came out. So he came and gave me his card and said, I'd love to talk to you. Why don't you give me a call? And I thought, Maverick Productions sounds like a film company. I'll put it in my room. And I did. And that was kind of it. And then Simon came to me the day after the last day when the fest was over and we were all getting ready to leave and said, oh, I work with Doug and we'd really like to talk to you about doing something together. And an English accent is more convincing than an American accent. Let's just be honest. Hearing that is like, oh, this is real. So that's how we got in contact. Then I think you phoned or you texted me and said,
Yeah,
mentioned the documentary or
yeah. I think it was an interesting thing, Steve, because we were in it was kind of like two kids in another table in New Jersey because he's Doug was just Doug is a big guy, he's well over 6 foot, he's a big, you won't want to cross Doug in a dark alleyway, but he was like, no, you talk to her, you go and
oh,
talk to her. So
funny. I
yeah,
heard
okay, no, I'll go and talk to her, of course, it's kind of what I do, and we got on, I think, pretty much immediately, didn't we?
totally.
Yeah.
Was there any other film that kind of influenced your starting up? And I'm thinking in particular of good old Frida. Did that film or did any other film have any influence on starting the
Not
project?
me as a filmmaker, I was really going by the energy in the book, because you read a book and you get a sense of a person, and then you meet the person, and the person is even nicer than the one that's in the book, and you feel more connected to that person. And then you start to think, well, what can we do with this? And I think one of the things that came out relatively quickly was that Chris was concerned to make sure that the book jumped across to a film in a way that would attract a wide audience generationally as well, and also perhaps targeted more at a general female audience as well. Because a lot of when you look at the documentaries that have been made around the Beatles and you look at all the people that are interviewed in those documentaries, they're mostly male, aren't they? I mean, you see very few documentaries where the female side of that story is really told. So from my point of view, it was a really good opportunity as a filmmaker to work with somebody who was a trailblazer in their profession. And because we got on so well together, it felt like it was going to be a really good ride. And my kind of philosophy in life is that you have to enjoy the process. If you enjoy the process of making a film in all respects of it, then that's going to come across on the screen.
Yeah. And we
Chris,
did.
Chris, how do you feel about that?
Well, I
Yeah,
love it
totally agree.
because, I don't believe him, but I really love it. No, actually, what just came up for me was that it took Doug and Simon to realize that I had been doing things that were totally out of the box at that time, that I was breaking glass ceilings at that point and doing something that really I don't think any other women were doing,
Mm.
with the touring and everything. And the Beatles, of course, I was the only American female there. So, and you two saw that where I don't think anybody had even paid attention to that before. It was like, oh, she worked for the Beatles. That
And
was
I
it.
think one of the things that was important with Doug is that he runs a company that is actually predominantly female run, kind of really got the high. That was kind of what attracted him partly because, there's this kind of history of women kind of making their way in different industries. And he saw that immediately in what Chris had done through the book. And I could see that as well, obviously, in the book.
Were there any difficulties in getting it off the ground? How long did it take you to structure, what you were going to do?
Well, we signed off at the Chicago Fest for Beatles fans.
He
It
took
was
Okay.
a step.
a few months later. And then I think it was more about the direction that Chris wanted the film to appeal to that wider audience, maybe because the book's written a number of years back, and then we have a contemporary audience and an audience to look forward to. So I think the only things that we kind of sat down and really formulated was how we were going to approach the storytelling in the book and how we were going to bring that to the screen. And also, one of the things that I think we were both concerned of is that a lot of books that are translated to the screen are kind of verbatim, so they kind of have a feeling that you're just watching somebody telling you the book. It's kind of like a PowerPoint presentation of a book. So we really didn't want to go down that route. And one of the people that I thought would be really interesting for Chris to meet and work with was Bob Harris, who's one of our sort of primary broadcasters with the BBC and who has a personal touch point not only with the Beatles, but with a number of the different people that Chris had come across during her career. And amazingly, they had never met each other, even though their paths had almost certainly crossed
Mhm.
at times during the period that Chris's story is told through. And because he's so laid back in the way that he engages with people, it was kind of important, I think, quite early on to introduce those two together so that they could really just chat. And we didn't over plan it. That was the key thing. You can really plan and overdo questions. And then you get this very staccated sort of film that comes out the other end. You ask a question, somebody answers the question. So we tried to make this as conversational as we could.
Yeah.
And that was, you know,
I
Go
sorry.
ahead,
I
Chris.
think that we made an effort not to follow the book in a
mm.
way, like to tell it from a different point of view. And I think what it was is you had certain people that you knew could be part of it, like Bob Harris, like Debbie Wellham. I think that you had some people kind of lined up who we should talk to. And we did actually film it around the anniversary of the rooftop.
Hmm.
Um, but it felt very generic. It just kind of happened. The whole thing just kind of well, I felt that way, just kind of came together.
So it was designed to kind of be, we set the filming out. It was over like 10 days or something, or 11 days or something we
All
did.
right. Mm-hmm.
And although it was quite intensive, we enjoyed the process, and that's exactly what I said earlier on. It is about kind of going in and looking forward to the next thing you're doing rather than dreading it. So, and we went to some really interesting places, didn't we, as well? So,
Oh,
Uh,
totally.
yeah.
one of the things that I noticed, and I mentioned this to Chris when I talked to her, is that you're right about the film not following the book. And one of the things that the film does is that it focuses basically on the Beatles. Why did you go that way, Simon?
I think it's, well, as a filmmaker, you want a touch point that everyone knows to
Mhm.
start. And of course, it is very close to this, it would have been a different type of film to tell the story if Chris had been working the other way around, worked her way with, the Rolling Stones and Dylan and whoever, and then found herself the Beatles the other way around. That would have been a different way of telling it. But because it kind of happened almost chronologically in that favor, and a lot of the sort of really early stories about how Chris found her way in the industry and found her way, particularly coming to a new country as well. Remember, she's coming from America to the UK and everything's different. And she has to settle in extremely quickly with the famous people on the planet and their entourage and fit in. And she does it kind of seamlessly, very, very quickly. So I think kind of the whole idea of the film starting where you kind of set something up and then you parachute her into the whole Beatles thing seemed like the natural way to do it and the most intelligent way.
Right.
Chris and Simon, how did you pick who appeared in the film with you? A couple were really obvious. Patty is obvious. Peter Asher is obvious.
Fine. Those were my two picks.
Those were your two picks.
Oh, and Leslie. I think Cavendish.
How did you come up with everybody else? I mean, the policeman.
Ray Dag kind of comes up in quite a few things, but obviously there are a couple of ways that he tells the story. And I contacted Ray pretty early in this project and told him about the situation, told him about Chris and everything, and he was very amenable to it. So it was, I think, with again, these things are, I'd love to say, you spend months planning out how you do these things. But the reality of it is you kind of look at the situation and you look at the people around that you feel are going to be able to bring those stories out or confirm those stories or were there at the time, like Ray, like Peter, Patty, and you work around that side of it. And then, we had a few, we had Mark Lewison, who has done an awful lot of work in the Beatles history area. Of course, his take on it is slightly, he has a different way of looking at it, which is a much more sort of academic way. Although I have to say in the film that, he's extremely charming in the film in the way that he engages with Chris. And that was really fun, wasn't it? He was just very laid back. And again, it was just kind of a very easy kind of interview, that one. And what was really nice about the whole process, Steve, is that everyone kind of bounced off each other really easily. And that was to do with Chris. Chris puts people at their ease very quickly. And, she's been there and done it and worn the t-shirt. And so everything's kind of very mellow. And she has this very mellow, kind of calm way about her, which everyone kind of falls into. Even if you come in off the back of quite a stressful time on things and then spend time with Chris, your whole anxiety level comes down.
Go ahead, Chris. I'll let
Oh,
you.
it comes down, but mine goes up.
Yes, that's the opposite. But
Okay.
yeah,
Had Ray's story been told in such detail before?
I don't think so, not in the detail he went into. And one of the things that was quite important about that interview, particularly with him, is that he was quite keen. He gets called to do a lot of things and he's getting on a little bit. So he was much more comfortable to sit in his own home and tell the story in his own home. So that was
Mm-hmm.
kind of a cross-country adventure for me because my sat nav didn't work and I had to ask about 10 people where he lived. But I eventually got there. And
Where was he?
oh, he's somewhere in the middle of the country here. You're talking to somebody whose geography is so bad I couldn't find my geography class at school. Yeah. So he's somewhere in the middle of the country, in the country, so you drive into the middle of fields almost, and there he is, not in a field, but he's in a house near a field. And so we sat and we spoke, and he's just one of these people that once he gets into the subject, he starts going. And the interview's lovely because he just, I didn't need to do that much. He just kind of, you wound him up and off he went.
And he even got into a little policeman role there with the way he was talking, which I thought was kind of interesting. I mean, how long has it been since he's been a policeman, and he's still, he actually went into that frame of mind there in some of what he
Yeah.
said to you.
I think the other thing, to be honest, Steve, is that he was so young at the time. That's the whole point. He was
Hmm.
kind of freshling in it, and he was the person that they kind of threw in. I think they threw him in, to be honest, because they felt he was so young that the people he was going to try and stop playing on the roof would kind of accept him because he was a much younger person like them, and that he was kind of age appropriate to the situation. And he did relatively well. He obviously got on pretty well with Mal. He liked a lot, so it's in that he made quite a big impression, which for somebody he meets for a couple of minutes is saying something. And one of the things I really like about him is that when the film came out, the Let It Be film came out, he was actually stationed because it was the cinema, the movie theater where it was opened was on his patch. So on the premiere nights that people were going in to watch the film and coming out, there's the copper on the roof right there in front. He's the guy outside the door when they're coming out of the film, which I just thought was
Wow.
really cute.
Yeah, that is really cool. Who was the most fun to work with as far as the people you interviewed? Who was the best?
Who are you asking? Actually, Simon,
Either
I'd like to hear what you
either
say.
one. Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead, Chris, if you want to respond.
I think Simon would.
Okay. Well, I suppose from a technical point of view, because he's so really, really good at doing it, and somebody I really love the way he works, is Bob. I thought Bob was amazing. But I think probably the most connected I mean, Tony Hanley was fun. He was great to be around. But I think Natalie Scarf, Debbie's daughter, was very special.
Hmm.
There was a real connection between the two of them. And it was really nice from Natalie's point of view because it's you don't quite know how obviously, you're going back into the 60s. So I don't know how much Debbie had been able to tell Natalie about the times in the building and what happened. And there were stories that Natalie knew, but I think she found it very reassuring to have somebody that was also there telling her the stories. Obviously, I think Chris reminded her of her own mother, the way that she cared about things. And hearing it from somebody that was there with her, I think meant a lot to Natalie. And I thought she's a very kind of Zen character, isn't she? And I just thought it was
Yeah,
a
she is.
just a really lovely person with a lovely family. And I thought that came across really well to have Chris to be able to tell her more about her mother, which I thought was just lovely.
Chris, do you agree with that?
I do agree. I also found you weren't there with Peter at the time, but Peter Asher, as nervous as I was about doing the thing with Peter Asher, actually in the film, it comes across really light and easy, which makes me happy. Bob
Why
was wonderful.
why were you nervous with Peter?
Well, I was doing a bit for his documentary too. So
Ah,
I had to do a bit for his, then he was going to do a bit for mine. And I hadn't seen Peter for a while, but I think I'd talked to him. I don't know, just it was a different surrounding. I mean, Simon was my comfort and he wasn't able to be there. So that made a difference, a huge difference, because I'm just used to Simon being there.
I think we were very lucky though, weren't we? Because the crew that actually handled that, we had quite a long chat with them before and the vibe of what we wanted to achieve. And I think they really delivered on that. They were very good.
They were really,
Mhm.
yeah. In fact, I am in Peter's doc, I heard the other day.
Oh, good.
Oh,
Okay, that
good. When's that coming out, Chris?
Think there Jeff Allen Ross, who's Peter's musical director, is working on the music now for it. So they're getting close. And they're thinking September,
oh
Okay.
good.
maybe.
Okay.
But it's like we know it's you say September and it could be next September.
Simon, could you see a sequel to the film to discuss more of what was in the book and not really touched in the film? Like Dylan, like the Stones. I mean, basically, you barely touched on those guys, on Linda, on Crosby, Stills and Nash, on Eric. I mean, there was a whole bunch of stuff there that, listening to what Chris had to say, I would have loved to have heard a lot more. I realize that, there's a length situation with the film. I mean, that film is about 2 hours as it is now. Could you do another film? And
We'll ask Doug.
Well, that's Doug. He's
um,
a Beatle fan. He's a big Beatle fan.
There is certainly, obviously, with Chris's story, as you said, Steve, there's a lot more to discover in it. Of course, there is, absolutely. I think it's something that we've been so engrossed in trying to make sure that this goes out and gets seen. And hopefully down the line, it could be something that we would look at and that there are other stories that are being told. But I think one of the things that Chris and I are keen to do is take what she has done in her life and go in all sorts of directions if we can.
Chris, you feel the same way?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there are other things to explore. And I mean, we didn't even mention Queen. It was
There's
one
a
of my favorite groups to travel with.
There's a lovely
Ooh,
picture of you and Brian May, but yeah, that's about it, isn't it, really?
Yeah, exactly.
talk a little bit. Just can you talk just a little bit about that since you didn't
Yes, I
discuss
can
it in the
do that.
movie?
In fact, it's got a hugely embarrassing first act. It was my first band I was going to work with in Germany. I had learned German, so I was going out for the promoter as his representative.
Hmm.
And I was on my way in Cologne to go pick them up. And I was with limousines. We had a couple limousines that were all going in a kind of row, and we hit a traffic jam. Not a little traffic jam, a big traffic jam on the motorway. And I'm like, can't you go down the middle lane? I mean, just go there. I've never had this happen in all my career because this was like in the early 80s. And we got there late, needless to say. So we pulled up in front of the airport, and it was much smaller back then. And I went into the reception area, and there was all of Queen and their helpers sitting there looking at me with daggers. I went, your limos are here. And they didn't say hi, anything. So it didn't start very well, but I have to say within a few days it was okay. And then I became really, really good friends with them on that tour. Yeah, it was wonderful. Actually, it was one of my favorite tours.
I guess I have to ask after the movie, what was Freddie like?
Freddie was great. I put him back in the closet.
Wait a minute, what?
At the end of I put Freddie back in the closet. And I can say this because Freddie's not here. We had a big party at a club in Munich.
Hmm.
And I always had some kind of drugs with me because that was just what you did, right? That's what a good tour manager's about. So he came up to me at one point and said, do you have any, hey, have you got any blow? And I'm like, yeah. And there happened to be a closet close to us where the housekeeping had kept all their supplies. So I said, come on in, because if we had done it out, everybody would have, it would be gone. So we went into the closet, had a little chat, and we did drugs. And I always say, I put Freddie back in the closet.
Very impressed that
Um,
housekeeping had their own supply of blow.
They didn't have, well, they were in Germany.
Yeah,
And
probably.
yeah, it was a little more difficult, but we could help them.
Yeah.
And I did.
you really, Chris, you didn't really go into the drug scene that much in the movie. As referring to the Beatles. I mean, I assume, and I don't want to get too, National Enquirer here, but I mean, I assume you probably could have gone a lot deeper had you wanted to, I suppose.
Well,
Is that
that's
right?
interesting because actually the late 60s, and this
Mhm.
is the way, I mean, of course, there was some acid around, and of course, there was heroin around, and of course, there was cocaine, but it wasn't part of the social scene that I was in with the Beatles. It was like we drink, there was some pot and everything. But in the late 60s, just wasn't around. They were into a lot of uppers. Red
Mm,
Bombers, I think they were called.
okay.
Red
Okay.
Bombers, something like that. And I did steal quite a few of those out of Neil Aspinall's drawer. But it was a different situation. Once in this, and then I went to work for the Stones. And that was I mean, if I were comparing, I would say that was like putting your toe in the water and the other was diving headfirst. It was just a vast difference. And then that one got me. Yeah, I kind of got that. Like I did too many drugs on the Stones tour. And actually, to be honest, I did a lot of drugs. But I'm amazed that I still was able to work. I think about it now and I think I still kept 100 people on the road and we all had hotels and we had ways of getting there. It's a miracle. And no cell phones or iPads or IMAX.
And you survived.
Yeah,
And you survived.
I
So,
survived.
wow.
You're preserved, Chris.
I am. That's what I think, Simon. Thank you. Because I think I'm so preserved, pickled.
No, but yeah, certainly. I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, you survived an incredible period, where it would have been easy to kind of fall down really hard, but you got through it amazingly well.
Some definitely did. Some
Mm,
did not make it. I think of Keith Moon immediately
absolutely.
and more.
Mm,
But, it wasn't just the bands. I mean, every executive at every record company had lines on their desk that was
Mm,
from cocaine. Cocaine was the drug. It was the
hmm.
entertainment drug through that time.
One thing I just wanted to add to what we've been talking about, which was really quite interesting in the process of making this film, is that I had been working with an editor called Alex Daniel on, because my sort of non-Beatles side is more kind of in the era of Star Wars. So he and I had been working on a Star Wars sort of series together,
Mm,
and he does a lot of trailer work and all sorts of things. And this was the first major feature length film that he had actually edited on, and he kind of got his entire education of the Beatles and the Stones and Dylan and all of these people through doing the film, which I thought was really
Because he's
interesting.
like what?
At
He's
12, isn't he? So
like 12. Yeah, he's in his 20s, right?
he's 28 now, but when he started the film, he was 25, 26.
Yeah.
mm.
So, and he comes from that generation that loved the Beatles when they hear them on the radio, but just doesn't really know much about the history, doesn't know what order the songs came out in and all of these kind of things. So he kind of genned up very, very quickly on it. It was really interesting to work with somebody that parachuted into something where I said to Alex, do you think you can handle this? Because you're great with X-Wing fighters and TIE fighters. Do you think you can deal with 60s and 70s kind
So
of
funny.
musicians and drugs? And he did really, really well. I mean, I think what's really nice about working with a younger editor is that they have a sort of very contemporary take on the way that things look. And so we spent a lot of time making sure, as with Chris's desire at the beginning of the film to make it feel like it would appeal to a much greater cross section of people, a more generational audience. It was really nice to have somebody younger kind of working at that side of it. And then we had Tom McConnell, who did quite a lot of the music, again, who's like, 30 now or something, and he's a Lipper graduate and doing his master's now. So it's really nice to include some of the younger generation people in it. And then we've had people like Skylar working to help, in certain areas of post with the post film side of it. So all of these guys are much, much, younger, and they're the future generations of people coming through. So it's been really nice to involve them in the process of the production as well.
Well, I want to thank both of you for taking the time. This took a little bit of setting up, but I'm thrilled. You guys are great. You're both great. Chris, it's great. It was great to talk to you again.
Thank you.
Um, I hope we get to talk again in the future for whatever reason. But thank you both for doing this. And that's about all I got to say. I'm gonna hit the record button, like right there. Here's a roundup of some recent Beatle news. On June 12th, the Beatles paid tribute on social media to the passing of Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. Paul McCartney posted, quote, Brian had that mysterious sense of musical genius that made his songs so achingly special. The notes he heard in his head and passed to us were simple and brilliant at the same time. I loved him and was privileged to be around his bright, shining light for a little while. How we will continue without Brian Wilson, God only knows. Thank you, Brian. Ringo posted a picture of himself with Brian Wilson and wrote, "God bless Brian Wilson. Peace and love to all his family." Ringo's been on tour, and a couple of celebrity guests showed up on with a little help from my friends at his show at Baycare Sound on June 21st. We've confirmed that Robin Zander of Cheap Trick and actor John Travolta were singing along. A photograph of Travolta and Ringo was posted by the actor on Instagram. One fan described it by saying, "Billy Shears and Danny Zuko, the crossover we didn't know we needed to have." The Liverpool Beatle Museum unveiled a new exhibit dedicated to longtime Beatle assistant Mal Evans on May 27th, which was his birthday. Mal's son, Gary Evans, and Mal's daughter, Julie Rosso, were both on hand. Variety reported on June 13th that audiences at the Annecy Animation Festival got a first look at the upcoming CG animated film High in the Clouds, based on Paul McCartney's book of the same name. The film features the voices of Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, Lionel Richie, Celine Dion, and others. San Francisco's De Young Museum announced June 9th that the run of Paul McCartney photographs 1963 to 64 Eyes of the Storm exhibit there will be extended to October 5th, 2025. The show has drawn more than 85,000 attendees since its opening. It features more than 250 personal photos plus video clips and archival materials from the age of Beatlemania. It also includes a free audio tour from Bloomberg Connects that connects an audio interview with Mary McCartney, Paul McCartney's daughter, and behind-the-scenes reflections from Paul himself. We had the pleasure of seeing the exhibit, and although it includes much of its material from Paul's Eye of the Storm book, it's well worth a visit if you're in the Bay Area. Actor Barry Keoghan has been undergoing some intense studying to play Ringo Starr in the upcoming quartet of movies directed by Sam Mendes. The drumming is now going great. I've been doing it for like 6-7 months. I've got blisters on my hands now. The films were announced in April and will come out in April 2028. According to a report in Variety, the films will be narratives from each Beatles' point of view. Terry Draper, a Canadian singer-songwriter and drummer and member of the noted 1970s progressive band Klaatu, died on May 15th at the age of 73 of leukemia. And does anyone think even a little that the return of Taylor Swift's catalog back to her ownership brings at least a little hope that the same thing could happen for Paul McCartney?
He's seeing you.
Well, this was a fun show. Learning about the workings of Apple was very cool. I want to thank the very delightful Chris O'Dell and the wonderful Simon Weitzman for all the stories and information they gave us today. If there was a story in the show you want to discuss or some thoughts on the show, send us an email at BeatlesNewsbriefs@gmail.com and we might read your thoughts on the air. The movie is available streaming on Tubi and Peacock, and is also available digitally on Apple, Fandango at Home, and Prime, and is also available on DVD and Blu-ray. If you like the show, please give us a good review, please. If you don't subscribe to us, please do, and tell your friends to subscribe. Till next time, this is Steve Marinucci saying,
Keep that one. Mark it fab.